Welcome to the Truth and Liberty Show, where trusted leaders bring biblical insights to important issues to help you stand for truth and effect godly change in our nation and in our world.
Welcome everybody to the Truth and Liberty Show. Today's going to be an amazing episode. I've got a great guest lined up for us today. Her name is Katy Talento, and I'm going to tell you more about Katy in a minute. But let me just begin by saying that corruption is a big problem in America today. What is corruption exactly? Well, the dictionary defines it as dishonest or illegal behavior, especially by powerful people like government officials or police officers. It also defines it as depravity or inducement to wrong by improper or unlawful means like bribery. But I think the best definition that I've seen of corruption is it is a departure from the original or from what is pure or correct. So we see corruption today in many areas in our nation, in our government. But one of the areas where we see it the most is in the area of medicine and the food industry. You know, medicine, we used to say that America had the best healthcare in the world. I think we still have one of the best healthcare systems, but I'm not so sure it's the best anymore. You know, that superiority of our system, it got there because of the free market system and because of integrity and character amongst the medical profession and community and our government officials in charge of regulating it. But did you know that during COVID, can you believe it's been 5 years now since the outbreak of the COVID pandemic? But during COVID, medical providers were controlled. We know this now. You know, during the pandemic, we could look and many people were saying something's not right. The way they're handling this, it's weird, it's different, it's not right. What we know now is that during the pandemic, medical providers were controlled by a corrupt alliance. That's right, a corrupt alliance among healthcare corporate CEOs, public health officials, big pharma, and politicians with a globalist agenda. Alongside them was a cooperative or co-opted news media that fed the false narrative about COVID, about the vaccines, about everything related to it. You remember during COVID how doctors couldn't prescribe, they were not allowed to prescribe common sense medications like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine? You remember how the media tried to tell us that these drugs were unsafe even though they'd been around for decades? Hydroxychloroquine was taken as far back as the Guadalcanal in World War II to prevent malaria, completely safe. Do you remember how when people were taken into the hospital for COVID, they were immediately intubated and the vast majority of them never survived? They were given some other drug, I forget the name of it now, but it wasn't the safe stuff, the proven stuff. How about masking? Oh, wear these social masks to stop the spread. These masks, these face masks everywhere. And how about social distancing? Oh, suddenly 6 feet. Yes, it's a magical distance. Germs don't travel past 6 feet. All of it was made up. It didn't work. People with common sense knew it didn't work. You can't stop the spread of a virus. How about lockdowns? Oh, these businesses, you're not essential. But oh, what about this? Churches aren't essential. And all these mom and pop shops and restaurants aren't essential. But you know what is essential? Well, all of our favorite leftist enterprises like abortion clinics, marijuana dispensaries, and gambling casinos. And the big businesses, of course, because we depend upon their money for our political survival. And then out came the experimental vaccines. They're not even vaccines. Using something called mRNA, which were not only, at the beginning were voluntary, but eventually the Democrats tried to make them mandatory. Many governments around the world made them mandatory. Joe Biden's administration forced them on our military personnel. How about the lies, outright lies told by Anthony Fauci? That, oh, this is coming from bats in some market in China. Well, these vaccines are safe. Yes, they are. And, oh, yes, this is all supported by medical evidence when none of it was. And what about the the cohort that included social media giants and the government who are working in sync to suppress free speech. You couldn't even post things on social media about how hydroxychloroquine might work, or about how masks didn't work, or about how the vaccines were unsafe. One lie after another from the very beginning of the pandemic, beginning with, oh, we just need 2 weeks for this lockdown to slow the spread. They knew very well that it wasn't going to slow the spread, and that their intentions were to keep us locked down for a long period of time. You remember the interruptions in the supply chain and the ascendancy of China in the entire process. Well, it's not just the medical industry that's corrupt. How about the food industry? You guys remember the phrase big oil used to be used to describe companies like Chevron and Phillips 66 and British Petroleum and so forth? Now we have a new label in America. It's called Big Food. Because massive corporations have bought up most farmland in America, our food supply in this country is now mostly manufactured. It's called ultra-processed food, or UPF. It comes to us not off the family farm, but out of factories and processing centers. Take, for example, fish that you buy at the supermarket. The vast majority of fish that you buy there is not caught in oceans or lakes or rivers, but it's grown in small ponds on fish farms. Salmon today is injected with dye. You know why salmon at the supermarket is orange? Because they grow it in farms, and then in the unnatural environment, the salmon don't develop their natural orangish color, so they inject it with dye. Cattle are pumped full of antibiotics and growth hormones. Grains, wheat, corn, etc., have been genetically modified to yield more, which means they contain more gluten than ever, and all sorts of other problems. Our food is filled with artificial sweeteners, enhanced sweeteners as well. So even if it's natural, it's to enhance the sweetness. Nut and seed oils, which they're discovering are harmful to our bodies. Preservatives, pesticides, flavors, gumming agents, degumming agents, and on it goes. The standards in America are not what they should be. As a result of this, our kids are sick, adults are sick. You know, politicians have delegated the job of protecting Americans to regulators, the FDA, the EPA, all these other three-letter agencies. But here's the problem, guys, which we're just now discovering. We're not just now discovering it, but we're just now beginning to face the reality. These federal and state regulators have financial incentives in place that cause them to become corrupted. What am I talking about? Well, dangled in front of them are private sector jobs. Okay, if you go along with me, then after you're done here at this agency, you can come work for my big corporation and make 3 times as much as what you're making here. Or to the financial income that comes from speaking engagements or publishing articles in so-called, scholarly periodicals. Furthermore, research grants, teaching gigs, all of these things are funded by the giant corporations that they're supposed to regulate. Researchers inside and outside of these big corporations and at universities are paid by the corporate giants. As a result of that financial incentive, they are researching with the end in mind, trying to prove the safety of drugs, additives, processes for food that common sense tells us this cannot be safe, this cannot be good for health. And then along comes the media. These giant corporations dangle big advertising budgets, or actually hold them hostage. And the media, the corporate media, the mainstream media, is all too happy to toe the line. Notice how they towed the line during COVID. They didn't do their job of reporting the news or questioning people in authority or asking common sense questions to get to the bottom of the matter. But they went along like, the Pied Piper and his children. The media has become subservient to the will of the leftist elite which control these giant corporations. You see, corruption is the deviation from our original purpose. The purpose of regulators in our government is to protect the public, not to serve the interests of big business. The purpose of scientists and researchers in universities and even in corporations is to get to the truth, not to manipulate studies, to give big corporations the answers they want. The purpose of doctors is to heal and to care for people, not to make money. But our system has become corrupted where doctors depend for their livelihood on medical corporations. And so they have to toe the line to what these officers in the medical corporation are telling them they must do. They're telling them you must prescribe this drug or else you're going to lose your job. Do not give them ivermectin or hydroxychloroquine or you're out on the street, doc. Folks, this is a big problem. And one of the greatest things about the incoming Trump administration is that Donald Trump has realized we have a problem in this area. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a champion for common sense and openness and reform in our federal agencies. And although he's not necessarily a conservative, he's certainly not a Christian conservative or favoring traditional Christian values on many things. He is passionate about this area. And I am excited and hopeful that the Trump administration is going to bring great reform into our federal agencies where it's needed most so that America can once again restore integrity into these regulatory agencies. Now, folks, you might be saying, well, this sounds like a boring subject, but let me tell you, this is where life is at today. We need this in a big way in America. And here to talk with us more about this subject is Katy Talento. Now, Katy is an epidemiologist, a naturopath, a veteran health policy advisor, and health benefits consultant. She's the founder and CEO of an organization called All Better Health, an insurgent benefits advisory firm that's building lower cost, high quality health plans for employers. Before she started at All Better, Katy was the health policy lead in the White House on the Domestic Policy Council, where her portfolio includes ending secret healthcare prices, lowering drug prices, expanding health IT interoperability, and combating the opioid crisis, protecting conscience rights in healthcare, and other initiatives. So I'm really excited to have Katy joining us today. We're going to be diving into this healthcare crisis in America and our growing food crisis and the toxic environment that we have created for ourselves in this country. So we're going to take a little break here in just a minute, and we'll be right back with Katy Talento. But before we do, I wanted to remind you guys about our free offer today. It's the booklet, What is a Biblical Worldview? So I've been talking about this recently. Now, Andrew Womack has produced a 4-volume series called Biblical Worldview. And these volumes each deal with a specific section of biblical worldview. We've got foundational issues. We've got a biblical view on racism. We've got socialism, and we've got human sexuality. These are created in cooperation with some of the greatest thinkers of our day. Well, this little booklet, What is a Biblical Worldview, is free of charge, and we're offering it to you today. All you have to do is go to our landing page on GTN's website. It's gtntv.com. Go to the Truth and Liberty page where you can find out how you can get a free copy of What is a Biblical Worldview. This booklet will help you begin to understand what a biblical worldview is, why it's important, and why we need to be instilling a biblical worldview in our children and as part of our work for the Lord in this country as we seek to make disciples of all nations. So pick up your free copy today by going to gtntv.com and finding the Truth and Liberty landing page. All right, guys. So we're going to be right back in just a few seconds with our very special guest today, Katy Talento. And we're going to be talking about healthcare in America and the food crisis in America and what we can do as Americans to make, as Donald Trump would say, make America healthy again. We'll be right back after this. Are you passionate about standing for truth in the culture, but don't know how to get started? Well, Truth and Liberty, our mission is to educate, unify, and mobilize the body of Christ to stand for truth in the public square. And as part of our mission, we provide you with an amazing array of resources on our website. And our website has just been revamped, remodeled, and retooled to be user-friendly. And I'm so excited about it because I believe that there's nothing like it out there anywhere. I want to encourage you today to go to truthandliberty.net and check out the Resources Center and the Get Equipped Center. On our Resources Center, you will find hundreds of links, hundreds of videos, articles, blogs, even America's original founding documents can be found on Truth and Liberty's Resources Center. It's searchable by topic, preset topic, or you can put in a custom search to find exactly what you need and what you're interested in. In the Get Equipped section, we link you to tools created by our strategic partners, including Pray, Vote, and Engage tools. We culture impact teams, civic action teams, biblical citizenship in modern America, biblical worldview training, and more. So go today to truthandliberty.net and find what you need to get equipped to stand for truth in the public square. Okay, well, we're back now after that break, and as promised, our special guest today here on Truth and Liberty is Katy Talento. Katy, thank you so much for joining us. It's really an honor to have you on the show today.
It's my pleasure, Richard. Thank you for having me.
Katy, we're going to talk today about your specialty, which is the need for reform in our medical profession, our healthcare industry, and our foods and everything like that. You've got an amazing background, even having served at the White House in the Domestic Policy Council there. Can you just take a minute and sort of tee this up for me? How bad is it out there in terms of, let's just start with the healthcare industry.
Yeah, well, I mean, the healthcare industry is a multi-trillion-dollar industry. It's a fifth of the economy. It's eating our economy. And it doesn't answer to you and me, Richard, and your audience. It answers to Wall Street shareholders. And they all do better when we are sick, when we're sick for life, when we need high-priced stuff done to us or bought for us. And so their priorities are not ours. We want to be healthy and pay less. They want us to be sick and pay more. So, everything's working against us. And that doesn't mean that, there aren't good people in the system. It's such a huge system. There would have to be good people in it. But that incentives matter. And the incentives are to keep suppressing symptoms slightly, temporarily, call it a win, instead of addressing root cause issues. Why are we so sick? I mean, we're paying, all these costs are going up, and we're paying more now for healthcare than we ever have. And yet we are the sickest, saddest, fattest, most infertile, most medicated population in human history. So something is definitely off. It's working for the industry. It's not working for us.
So there's actually a perverse incentive, it sounds like, in the healthcare industry to keep people sick, to keep people dependent on what? Medication, regular visits, all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of hospital systems which are pretending to be tax-exempt charities that are actually just giant corporate multi-state organizations that are profiteers and price gougers. And if you don't pay your bills, they'll send predatory collectors after you. And yet they pretend to be charities. We think they advertise themselves like they're some sort of white hat, in our community, but they're not. They are predators. And then you have, of course, the pharmaceutical industry, which needs us to be patients for life, needs us to be customers for life. You see a lot of this in the transgender industry where, these pharmaceutical companies are lobbying Congress to mutilate children and keep them on hormones for the rest of their lives. I think it's a real problem when, this industry that has it's had for so many decades, this trust from the public that's actually betraying us every day. You really do get more of what you pay for. And we pay for sickness. So, the industry gets paid when people are sick. So that is going to create more sickness. It's going to create the incentives in the system that drive that. There's no interest, there's no curiosity in developing affordable treatments and therapies like food changes and, off-patent drugs. There's no incentive for that. There's no incentive for research as to the root causes of these illnesses, many of which are spiritual, honestly, and lifestyle related. We're disconnected from nature. There's so many reasons why we're sick that have nothing to do with, an Ozempic deficiency or a Lipitor deficiency.
Mm. Well, Katie, I'm sure you do too, but I believe in free enterprise. I think that businesses ought to be able to make a profit. A doctor goes to school for a third of his life or her life. He or she ought to be able to make a nice living, and there's nothing wrong with that. But where did we go wrong here? How did medical practitioners, the doctor, the guy who goes to medical school because he wants to heal people, the woman who becomes a nurse because she's gifted in caring for people, and forgive me for the stereotyping there, but where did we go wrong? How did they become captive by a perverted, corrupted industry?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The people who invest a lot in their education should be able to make a good living off that investment. However, that education is not providing something that's valuable to the public. It's one thing when you become an engineer and you have skills that are extremely useful and that solve problems, or you're an accountant, you have skills that solve problems, even, God forbid, lawyers that solve problems. But, when you're a doctor, you're actually not solving problems. I mean, I hate to say it, but you are just temporarily, occasionally suppressing symptoms. More often, you become a high price referral factory for higher revenue procedures in a hospital system that, suppress symptoms or just serve as band-aids to problems rather than you're not really solving problems. You're reacting and putting on temporary fixes to problems, or you slow problems down from getting worse rather than getting to the root cause of them, preventing them and actually utterly reversing them. And so many of our healthcare problems can be utterly reversed, but not by a doctor. I mean, too often the medical system, if you ask any medical provider today, how much time in medical school did you spend on nutritional information, and you will find out it was less than an hour, less than 2 hours. I mean, there was recently a report that came out from the medical schools that said, hey, maybe we should start teaching nutrition regularly in medical school. And yet this is the external environmental exposure that all of us have pounds and pounds of consumption every day. And yet we spend all this time worrying about the impact of a tiny little pill that we put in our body. And nobody talks to us about the pounds and pounds of stuff that we're putting in our body every day in the form of food and beverages. Don't you think that's having a much more dramatic impact on us than even what a little pill can do? So to have doctors who actually never learned really about the exercise physiology, that never really learned about the impact of nature, the impact of social connection, the impact of spiritual purpose, and the impact of food and beverage, that is so much more powerful an influence on our health. The evidence, I mean, I'm not even talking about, this isn't like, my beliefs. These are evidence-based conclusions. These factors have far more influence on our health outcomes than anything doctors are doing to us in your average visit.
There's so many directions we could go with this, Katie, but I want to ask you about this whole idea of how did healthcare get so expensive? And I've read some stuff saying that a big part of it is because of inflated demand that's injected into the system because of government subsidy of healthcare costs that started with the Medicare, Medicaid, or employer-sponsored healthcare plans. People go to the emergency room for all kinds of stuff like that, which, more demand means higher prices. What would happen if we actually looked at the system from a free enterprise perspective and decided to, pull back on socialized or socialistic answers?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think a lot of people hear me kind of railing against the corporate greed in the medical system, and they assume that I'm a socialist and I want a single payer. No, certainly, I think free market is a great idea. It's never been tried in healthcare. So it's neither free nor a market. You can't have a market when you don't have prices available to the public. I mean, President Trump, when I worked there, we worked on the very first measure ever to force prices to be disclosed by hospitals and insurers on their secretly negotiated contracts between each other, hospitals and insurers. And yet patients and employers are bound by those contracts. You use your network every day, and that network is basically nothing more than a contract between a doctor or a hospital and your insurer as to what that doctor's going to get paid. And you're bound by that contract. What you pay on your deductible, or what you pay as part of your co-insurance percentage, or certainly what your employer pays or what the government pays. All these are set by these secret contracts that we're not a party to. And yet we can't even know what the terms of those contracts are. And we're totally bound by them. And so that is why we've had prices go through the roof, is because a total secrecy in pricing. That's not true of any other industry where prices are secret from consumers. How can there be price competition? How can we shop on price like we do in every other industry? Because we don't know the prices. I would argue that's the largest driver of price inflation in healthcare.
Well, one of your specialties is in health sharing, right? So health sharing networks. Can you explain what that is, and why is that a good thing?
Absolutely. So healthcare sharing ministries are Christian religious communities that come together and share one another's medical expenses. We believe it's an extension of the biblical, directive to bear one another's burdens. We think it's how Jesus would do healthcare. But essentially, what you do is you go to the doctor, you get your bill, you say, I'm a cash pay patient, or, I'm a ministry member, and that doctor or hospital bills you. You pay cash, or you ask to be sent a bill, and then you upload your bill or your receipt after the fact to a ministry portal. The ministry then reviews the bill, makes sure that all those receipts are not for abortions or gender mutilations and other procedures that would violate our consciences. And then if they're eligible for reimbursement and sharing, then what will happen is they'll tap other members in the community on the shoulder and ask them to send their monthly contribution that they send every month to you, and to help share in your medical bills. And you'll receive money either electronically or even checks in the mail, along with notes of prayer and encouragement to help share in those bills. And it's a really beautiful kind of, I think it makes healthcare more human again. And it's sort of how you would want, you want your Christian community in that exam room with you and the doctor. When you're at those most vulnerable life and death moments, you don't want some cold insurance bureaucracy, in between you in those moments. And I think because of that, people really are drawn to this approach. And it certainly has turned out to be much more affordable. A lot of the ministries base their model on cash pay rather than those secret insurance contracts or those secret network contracts. So I think it has the opportunity to really make healthcare as affordable as it can be in this, kind of dramatically price inflated industry. But still, there's no real way out of the price gouging in the healthcare system. But I think there's sort of a hack to that system in a lot of ways. And of course, Christians take care of our bodies. We view our bodies as temples of the Holy Spirit. And, these ministries, they actually require their members to commit to treat their bodies that way and to live a healthy lifestyle. So that community of believers is actually going to generally have fewer healthcare costs than your general population in the Affordable Care Act marketplace, for instance. So
we put up on the screen, I want to put it back up, the website for Alliance of Healthcare Sharing Ministries. And that's an organization that you help lead, right? ahcsm.org. So if people go to that website, what are they going to find?
Yeah, they're going to find out all about healthcare sharing ministries. They're going to find policy matters that we're fighting a lot of states that think that we should be, under the regulators' thumbs as religious organizations. We're even suing one state in Colorado that is trying to really micromanage our religious exercise. And so we really advocate for the interests of healthcare sharing ministries and their members to try to protect our religious liberty to operate in this way that is outside, this government-imposed healthcare industry model. And so it's important. It's important for people to take a look there and see what we're up to.
Well, so Katy, during COVID, you remember how doctors had their hands tied. In terms of prescribing common sense medication to fight COVID, medications that everyone knew were safe. They'd been around for years and years, and yet all of a sudden, no, they're dangerous. They collaborated with media and social media giants to suppress any kind of communication about these things, and they created this fake vaccine that ended up has killed lots and lots of people. And I have a good friend right now who is in long-term care because of complications from COVID and possibly shed vaccine remnants and stuff like that, and had another friend that died. I'm wondering, how did that happen to our healthcare industry in America? How were they able, how were they were subjected to that kind of control and lying and manipulation? What are your thoughts about that whole experience?
Yeah, well, the FDA has been corrupted. And one of the main reasons that this all happened is because in order for the authorization to occur under the emergency use authorities that the Secretary of HHS has for the vaccines, what had to be sort of a checkbox that had to be checked by the Secretary in order to give this temporary authorization was that there were no other therapies or treatments available for the disease that was the cause of the public health emergency. And so in order to do that, we had to suppress any other alternatives if we were going to give this emergency use authorization to these vaccine companies that we had, gotten into bed with, and that we had promised that we would, have the government buy all their product and mandate all their product. And so in order to carry that out, I mean, somehow it got so politicized that the FDA was on the side of the regulated entities. They're supposed to protect the public from the, corruption of greedy for-profit companies peddling their products. Instead, it was quite the opposite. They were protecting those companies from the public and from public scrutiny. And as a result, this emergency use authorization process got completely corrupted, so much so that even after, it was very clear that the products did not prevent transmission of this virus, we were dealing with a situation where the FDA came in and started approving the product, giving formal approval, not just emergency approval, but formal approval as if it were safe and effective. But really, Richard, if you look at the original Pfizer trial, the clinical trial, there's a chart, an all-cause mortality chart as to, how many people died in the control group who did not receive the vaccine versus how many people died in the vaccinated group. And it says of what all the causes of their death were. And you can see that in that very first trial, the trial upon which the approval was given to the Pfizer vaccine, there were 4 times more people who were killed by cardiac diseases in the vaccinated group compared to the one life that was saved in the vaccinated group. So for every person we so-called saved from COVID, from the vaccine, we killed 4 more people from cardiac causes. And so that was known from the very beginning. It's the S4 chart. It was put out by Robert F. Kennedy at the time. That's how I first saw it. I didn't, read the supplemental amendments to the clinical trials. He exposed that for everyone years ago in 2020 or 2021. And so this should have been known all along, but the FDA didn't care. They were too far down the road. The Biden administration was too far down the road at that point in their vaccine mandates, and they couldn't walk it back in the direction of public health insanity.
Wow. Well, what needs to be done, Katy, to turn our medical and healthcare industry around and bring more common sense and integrity and accountability, fairness, freedom into it?
Yeah, so I mean, I think there are a number of reforms that need to take place at all levels of the federal government. If we start at HHS, although I think USDA, the Department of Agriculture, has a huge role here when it comes to food. But let's just say we start at HHS, Health and Human Services. And, starting at FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, one of the things we need to do is we need to get all the people off the advisory committees that make recommendations about approval of products. These are outside advisors that are supposed to be independent, and yet 100% of them are paid by the pharmaceutical industry. They are researchers at academic medical centers, and all their research is funded by pharma, and they are not independent. And instead, they waive these ethics requirements. They just waive them because they can't seem to find anybody who's not conflicted. And then the same thing happens at CDC. So after the FDA recommends that a product be approved for a certain population, whether it's adults or kids or pregnant women, then the CDC decides, are we going to recommend this? Are we going to recommend it on the childhood schedule? Are we going to recommend it to states for certain populations? And that also recommendation follows an advisory panel of outside experts who are also equally conflicted. They're on the dole of vaccine manufacturers. So first, that's the first thing, is like, we cannot have any conflicted advisors. Second, I would say that we really need to take a look at the emergency use authorization process, and we need to button that up. So when a secretary declares that there's an emergency, like say for COVID, or God forbid for, bird flu that we have coming at us, or the climate, or whatever the WHO declares to be a pandemic, We need to make sure that emergency use authorizations are only used when there is no other effective treatment. And so when there's no other effective treatment, we do not, waive the liability. That's what the EUA does. It waives liability so that you cannot sue these companies, no matter how grievous the injury, no matter how corrupt the action of the pharmaceutical company. And that's true also for the third reform, I would say, which is we need to repeal the 1986 Act, which provides vaccine manufacturers liability protection that no other drug manufacturer has, or any other manufacturer of any other product in our economy has, which is if they harm or kill even consumers, they cannot be sued. It's totally outrageous. And so that has to be reformed. I think that if those reforms were put in place, we would be in a very different place.
Well, yeah, and that would probably just be the tip of the iceberg, I'm sure. But I'd love to go down the vaccine route with you today. I remember just one question, I can't help myself. When we were kids, you got what, like maybe 7, 8 vaccines, Today, kids are getting how many, 20, 30 vaccines? And how many stories I encountered when we were dealing with my son's autism of so many families who the autism in their children began at their 2-year vaccination point. The kids would come home and suddenly never recover, and yet we're told to believe that vaccines have nothing to do with autism. It defies belief. Is that a field that needs a major reform?
100%. I mean, you're right. You and I are about the same age. When we were growing up, there were 3 vaccines on the table. There were about 7 or 8 doses of those 3 vaccines. Okay. Today, there are dozens of vaccines, and there are, over 72 doses that a child receives before age 18. There are 28 or so doses before age 2. So that includes shots for STDs on the first day of life. STDs like hepatitis B virus. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, this is insanity. It's totally off the rails. It's driven entirely by the liability protection. After that 1986 Act was passed, that's when we had the proliferation of vaccines for diseases that aren't killing children, that are not serious health threats. But because they're profitable, because they're profitable, now vaccine companies are coming in trying to get their product on the vaccine schedule, because then the entire country has to purchase their product just to send their kid to school. So it is a massive problem. I do think that the link between autism and vaccines must be investigated. There are potential other explanations, potentially, like we've heard of some, other explanations, but they all need to be investigated. And it may be that it's all of them together, right? We started seeing a proliferation of glyphosate, the pesticide, on our food in the 1990s, the same time that autism was rising, the same time that the vaccine schedule was growing. And what we see is that vaccines and glyphosate, and there are other, that's when we started seeing the cell phones and, 2G, 3G, 5G, all these screen time, all these are inflammatory in our bodies. They have inflammatory effects. And autism is really nothing more than brain inflammation. And so we see that brain inflammation and a toxic response to some sort of inflammatory exposure is what's driving and causing these autism episodes. And, we also see it in gut inflammation. Yes. Gut inflammation is very much tied to our brain. The gut is sometimes called the second brain. Right. You have all these neurotransmitters that are actually created in our gut. And you can see that when you change the diet of a child with autism, when you change that inflammatory environment in their gut, you remove inflammatory foods, you can have dramatic reversal of autism symptoms, sometimes all the way. It's really beautiful. Maybe you know something about that, Richard.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think we were talking before the show about how my son was healed of autism, and I give God all the glory for it. We stood by faith for it. But, we went completely gluten and dairy free and ate nothing but natural products during the time, and had a regimen of supplements and things like that we consulted with a naturopath on. And I thank God that Max is healed. But there's no, I learned a lot about how the gut is really the center of the immune system. And autism is one of several autoimmune disorders that have become epidemic throughout our country in the modern era. And the working theory is that it's because of an overload of toxins in our environment and in our foods and in vaccines. And you can't necessarily pin it on one thing thing or the other exclusively, but certainly an overload of vaccines can do it. And I do believe that's what did it in our case, because my wife had gotten bitten by a spider during her pregnancy. And so she had that toxin in her body. And then there was some kind of scare. I think it was swine flu at that time. And they said, oh, if you're pregnant, you need to get the vaccine because this could affect. And of course, I was uninformed then. I thought, yeah, okay, honey, you probably should go and get it. She didn't want to, but she did. I take the blame. She got that, and then Max was born, and I knew something was wrong from the very beginning. And but thank God he's healed, and thank God that this stuff is coming to light now, and maybe we can begin to help people. Let's talk about the food industry a little bit more, if we could. Katy, is it true that most farmland, or at least a great amount of farmland today in America, is not owned by farmers and families anymore? It's owned by corporate food companies. And that we have, cattle are raised in these feedlots, injected with antibiotics, growth hormone. We have genetically modified food. We have pesticides. And then it goes into the manufacturing process and all of this ultra processed food. I mean, what has happened to our food in this country, and how bad is it?
Yeah, it's very bad. It's driven by an increasing, consolidation and a decreasing number of companies that are involved, so that you've got these giant corporations. Some of them are multinational corporations. We have China owning a ton, like millions of acreage of farmland in America. I hope that that's something that the new president can stop. And put a stop to. I know some states have started to put a stop to purchase of farmland by China or any other foreign country. So yeah, what we're seeing in our food supply, especially let's start where you started, which is livestock, where we've got massive amounts of animals living in unnatural environments that is totally foreign to their species, what their species needs in terms of what they eat, how they live. They're corralled in these inside cages, and that they're grown. Chickens are grown so fat with all these injections and hormones and antibiotics and vaccines. They're so fat that their legs break and they can't even hold themselves up. They can't move. And then you have pigs that are living in their own feces. I mean, the industrialized pork industry is so dangerous today for your family to be fed on. That's not to say we shouldn't eat pork. We should eat regenerative meat raised at regenerative farms. And then animal products are the most healthy products that we can eat. But when they're not raised by regenerative farms, when they're not protected from these horrific pesticides on the foods that they're eating, we are what we eats. We are what the animals that we eat. And they're eating corn and soy products. Soy, of course, is an endocrine disruptor. It acts as an estrogen, and it could be related to why we're having massive reductions in sperm count. Since, in the past 50 years, the sperm count globally, worldwide, has been cut in half. And we wonder why we're struggling with so much infertility in our families today. It's not just, I think women often get blamed for working too long and trying too late. But I don't think that we're looking closely enough at what's happening to the sperm count of our men or the testosterone counts of our men, which is being dramatically harmed by these estrogenic effects in our food supply. We also have pesticides like glyphosate, I mentioned earlier, which serves as an obesogen. It destroys the microbiome in your gut, which, like we just were talking about, has a dramatic impact on the neurotransmitters and all kinds of issues in our gut, in our immune system, in our brain. And so that glyphosate is not just sprayed on plants when it's first growing, but it's sprayed right after we harvest or right before we harvest as a drying agent. If it's rained too much, you can't cut the wheat, right? So they spray glyphosate from the skies to try to dry that crop so it can be harvested. So right before it's dried, right before it's milled into flour, that we eat in the form of crackers or cereal or other ultra processed food. I mean, you think about saltines, it's not just candy, it's not just cookies or potato chips. It's literally anything that comes in a box or in a package that we may think is healthy, but if it's not organic, it's drowning in these toxic chemicals. And that, wow. We wonder why we have chronic illness among children. Half of all children are chronically ill. More than 2/3 of American adults have more than one chronic illness. Half of all children are obese. I mean, this is terrifying.
Oh, it really is. I just did a little bit of research before the show, and I saw that America's diet is 60% ultra processed foods. That's foods that are manufactured in factories, not, picked off the vine and sold to you fresh, and with all kinds of harmful ingredients, compared to Europe, where it ranges between 14 and 44%. So even the worst European nation is 15 to 20 points better than America. That's shameful, I think, don't you?
Yeah, it's absolutely the impact of the food lobby in here. And, I worked in the Congress for many years, and I know how powerful these lobbying interests are. The most powerful lobbying interest is the healthcare industry, but the next most powerful interest is the food industry, because, of course, they come in cloaked in the image and the messaging of your family farm, right? Like, you can't take down our ranchers, you can't take down our farmers. We have to continue those sugar subsidies, or our farmers will go out of business. This is a really big problem. It's hitting Republicans in farm states, in red states. And so, we're told that we have to do whatever it takes to keep our farmers. I mean, we need to be investing in helping our farmers transition to processes and farming methods. And maybe that's going to require spending. I would be in favor of taking all of our sugar and corn and soy subsidies and transitioning those subsidies into subsidies to help them transition to organic farming and regenerative farming. I don't mind spending a ton of money on that, because that is what's driving the health of our people.
Well, that's a fascinating idea right there. Is that a policy? Is that a reality right now? Is anyone really considering that? That would turn the industry upside down, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I know that Bobby Kennedy was talking about that. I was kind of hoping he would be a White House czar instead of a secretary of HHS, because at the White House, he could affect more than one department, right? He could affect USDA, where that would be an important policy. I don't know if hopefully incoming Secretary Brooke Rollins will be open to these ideas. I certainly hope she will. I know that there are a lot of people in the health movement that are very nervous about her nomination, but she's a mom and she's a really great, beautiful Christian. And I believe that she cares about these issues too. And so I'm hopeful that she'll be interested in them.
Well, let's go back to the corporate reality in the food industry. So the vast majority of food that we consume off our grocery shelves is manufactured by a handful of companies, right? How many are there really? Is it somewhere around 10 to 12 or even fewer than that?
It's even fewer than that. I mean, one of probably the biggest scandal in sort of food history. Well, there are many. That's a wall of shame. But one of the biggest scandals is when right after the master tobacco settlement, where the tobacco companies paid out $1 zillion to all the states. This was in the 90s. The two big tobacco companies actually purchased the biggest food companies, including the two big food companies purchased tobacco companies. And so you have RJ Reynolds and Nabisco coming together. You have Kellogg's and Philip Morris. You have all these companies coming together. And what happened is they took those scientists that were expert in addicting us to tobacco products, and they turned their skills onto addicting us to food products. And they formulated and engineered these foods to trick our bodies, so that how can we get the right ratio of fat, salt, and sugar to totally trick our bodies into thinking it's getting protein. Richard, when our bodies are taking food in, what causes us to feel full and to stop eating is when our bodies have received the right ratio of protein. When we get the right amount of protein, that's when our body turns on that satiety factor, where we start to feel full and we stop eating. That's why you can never overeat on meat. You can never overeat on dairy products, really, because that protein comes in and you just can't overeat. And so you get too full. But what they did is they started making ultra processed food that our brains think, because of it's that savory flavor combined with fat and salt that we're used to, that when we usually get those signals, it means it's meat, it means it's protein. And so you get like the Pringle or the perfect Dorito, and our bodies are like, okay, this is a protein source, and we keep eating. We're like, Not getting enough protein, need to eat more. Not getting enough protein, need to eat more. So we can't turn it off. And so we've been tricked, and it's super addictive, such that our bodies get completely addicted to that carb ratio between the fat and the salt and the sugar. And so this was science, this was engineering. It was perfectly, precisely formulated to turn us into customers for life. These companies weren't trying to kill us, kind of like the tobacco companies weren't trying to kill us. They want us to be addicted for life and live forever. But it turns out that actually this is killing us. But before it kills us, it causes us to spend a ton of money on these food products. So it's really dangerous out there.
Do we have the same problem, Katy, in the food regulatory area, like the FDA and others, that we have in the medical field, where our regulators are being corrupted because of the influence of big business financially?
Absolutely. And honestly, if it could be worse, it is worse. I'm not sure it can be worse, but it seems like it's worse. And one of the problems is that, unlike HHS, at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, in its charter, it says it is supposed to be advocating for the agricultural interests of the United States. So, when you've got a regulatory, let's take a look at the transportation industry. In the transportation industry, you have the Department of Transportation, which advocates for the transportation industry. But then you have the National Transportation Safety Board, which is an independent regulator of safety in the transportation industry. The two are not the same. And HHS was supposed to be like this. It was supposed to be HHS advocates, but FDA regulates, right? And that's why FDA is supposed to have this sort of differential independence a little bit, but it doesn't. But at USDA, it's the same. It's in the charter. USDA is our regulator and it's our cheerleader for industry. Those two functions are mutually exclusive. We need to be protected from these giant interests, not protecting the interests from us again.
During the pandemic, I had this thought that, a pandemic ought not to be a partisan issue. But it seemed like during COVID that everything was breaking along Republican Democrat lines, especially the longer we were in it. And it seemed like that the Democrats were much more beholden to and willing to back the government, social media, establishment narrative of, oh yeah, if you love people, you'll stay at home and wear a mask and get a shot, and all of that sort of thing. And, oh no, churches aren't essential and this and that. Do you think that, what's your observation about this and the whole willingness, whether of conservatives to take a fresh look at the corruption that's in government versus the Democrats' sort of hesitancy to go there, and they're more in league and in bed with the deep state, frankly?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. It's been a funny transformation in my life as sort of in working in health policy over the years. We used to be accused of being the ones that were sort of industry hacks in the pocket of big pharma and whatnot. But there really has been a shift in recent years, and it was no more pronounced than during COVID. And I think it was accelerated by sort of just Trump derangement, right? So because President Trump was talking about hydroxychloroquine, we have to be against it. Because he was trying to accelerate a vaccine, we didn't want to accelerate a vaccine. So it was bizarre. So I do think that because Republicans were more open-minded, that Democrats became more closed-minded just out of a knee-jerk response in this hyper-partisan era. And it's really unfortunate. But I will say that that's one of the reasons why I think that COVID had such a clarifying view. It really threw all the traditional orthodoxies up in the air, and they have landed in very interesting places, such that now we've got an old school Democrat who, Bobby Kennedy has spent his whole career suing big corporations, usually polluters, to try to protect the public and the public health. And so he brings that old school Democrat that's very suspicious of industry, that mindset to the job. And I think that's exactly what we need is sort of that stereotype, honestly, that stereotypical Democrat view from the past into where we are in the present. And Republicans increasingly are sharing that. We've been persecuted by big tech. We've been persecuted by, big hospitals. We've been persecuted by big banks. Conservatives are now starting to see persecution by the bigs. And so we have really turned our minds around about defending them, and Democrats have become their defenders. I hope that doesn't continue. I really hope that this populist movement, where we all unite in favor of what's good for America against any big corporations that are trying to insinuate their way into dominance and authority over us. I hope that we are united in that. It used to be in health policy that Republicans were for industry and Democrats were for government. I really think that COVID helped turn it into, it's not so much Republicans versus Democrats anymore. It's now just like the healthcare swamp against the rest of us. And I really think President Trump was one of the first ones to articulate that idea. Yeah. And I think we're going to see a lot more policy driven out of that approach.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Katy, one more plug here. You actually have your own practice as a holistic healthcare advisor. I think I said that right. I don't know, but allbetter.life is your website. Would you like to comment on that?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm a naturopathic doctor. I'm also an infectious disease epidemiologist. So I have kind of the old and the new together. And so, yeah, they can find me at allbetter.life.
Awesome. Well, it's been great having you on Truth and Liberty today, Katy, and I hope you'll come back and visit us real soon. It's been a fantastic conversation.
Thank you so much for having me, Richard.
Awesome. Well, folks, I wanted to remind you about our product giveaway today. It's What is a Biblical Worldview, a booklet by Andrew Womack. As I've said before, Andrew has created a 4-volume series called Biblical Worldview. Alex McFarland, our good friend and board member here at Truth and Liberty, helped Andrew develop that series, and this is just a little taste of that. But did you know that only 4% of Americans hold to a biblical worldview? We struggle as conservatives, wondering why we keep losing these policy debates and the younger generation becoming radical Marxists and all this other stuff. Well, this is it, folks. It's because they don't have a biblical worldview. God and the God of the Bible especially is not at the foundation of what most Americans believe now, and we have to restore that. But this is available for you for free if you'll go to the website. I believe it's at truthandlibertygtn.com. You can find your free copy today. And so I encourage you guys also to be sure to check out Katy Talento's websites. First one being atlcsm.org. That's for the Healthcare Sharing Ministries Alliance, and then also allbetter.life. And folks, on this important issue of our health as a nation, get informed and find opportunities to tell others and advocate for others. This is an issue of serious, big importance. Thanks for watching today. God bless you. We'll see you next time on Truth and Liberty.